Greetings to everyone. My name is Dudi Maroshi, member in the Ovid project. In less than 10 minutes, I will present to you Ovid 3.6 features for VM placement and VM pinning. The agenda for the presentation is first review basic terms and definitions used across the presentation. Explain placement policy why, what, and how. Explain migration restrictions, why, what, and how. I will review relevant improvements and updates to Ovid 3.6. Then describe updates to the REST API relevant to these features. Describe features, concerns, and limitation, and finalize with reference to relevant information in Ovid project. And now I will review some required terms and definitions. A VM is a virtual machine managed by Ovid Engine. A host is a hypervisor computer managed by Ovid Engine. VM defined time is the time for administrator to configure resources to VM, such as virtual hardware and memory. VM start time is the time when VM is starting and physical resources are allocated. Placement policy happens at VM start time and is responsible for selecting a host for the VM. Dedicated or preferred host is a placement policy rule requesting a VM to start on a specific host. Migration is a runtime activity relocating a running VM across hosts with minimal disruption to the running VM. Pinning is a migration restriction, actually forbidding migration. Replacement and relocation is a VM defined time activity modifying a dedicated hosts list, requiring VM restart in order to be effective. And now I will explain placement policy. It is required by administrator to have manual control on VM start up location in order to control cloud resources at startup. For instance, in a small cloud with few hosts, where some hosts have more memory than others, few VMs with large memory consumptions cannot start together on the same host or any of the available host, and it must be manually administrated to start on a specific host. Placement policy is assigned at VM defined time. That means at VM creation time or VM update time. Placement policy is configured in the VM edit dialog box in the host panel. If placement policy required, select specific radio button, then scroll the select and select the preferred host from the selection box. Use the Control plus click for multiple selection. And there are some reservations about placement. Placement policy is effective only at start time and not migration time. Second, placement policy is suggestion only. The preferred host may be unavailable at VM startup time. And third, VM location may change at runtime after migration. And let me explain how it works. Placement policy is implemented by the scheduler component, selecting a host for VM at startup time, using the following kind of simplified algorithm. First, if there are any available preferred hosts, select the best matching host for the VM. Second, if there are no available preferred hosts for the VM, select the best available matching host for the VM from active hosts in the cluster. Third, if no available host found for VM, fail the VM startup and report. Now I will explain migration policy and restrictions. required by administrator who wants to have full migration control on some VMs and allow automatic migration on other VMs. Depending on the physical resources a VM consumes at runtime. For example, a VM that requires a GPU, but there is only one host with capable GPU, therefore VM using the GPU is not allowed to migrate and is pinned. Migration policy is assigned at VM defined time per each VM, at VM creation time or VM update time. A migration policy is configured in the Edit VM dialog box in the host panel. To select the migration policy, use the drop-down selection box. The available options are allow automatic and manual migration, allow only manual migration, and forbid migration, that means pinning. Pinning is applied to selected dedicated hosts. Running VM is allowed to be pinned only if it runs on one of its dedicated hosts. A side effect to removing a host with pinned VMs is that the pinned VM may lose its preferred host and therefore will be pinned to the next host when it starts on. And a pinned VM may relocate to another host only after reboot. And now I will review relevant improvements in OVID 3.6. First and most important, allow pinning to multiple hosts. The relevant use case is providing high availability to pinned VM, but it comes with restriction. First, VM with attached host devices may have only single preferred host. Second, same applies to VM with NUMA nodes. Must be pinned to a single preferred host. The second improvement in OVID 3.6 is allow running VM to be pinned, but the VM must run on a preferred host, otherwise it will be locked out from its preferred host. Third improvement, include multiple selection box to the GUI. And fourth improvement, extend the REST API placement policy element to accept multiple hosts. Now I will detail the improvement into the REST API. When posting or putting an HTTP request for a VM, there is a placement policy element included inside the VM element used for defining placement and migration policy. The placement policy element has optional single host element for single dedicated host, or optional hosts list element containing optional few host elements. A host element is uniquely identified with ID attribute or name element. And last, the affinity element, which defines the migration policy using one of the three options: migratable, user migratable, and pinned. And here we reach the last slide. Review the constraints and limitations. First, pinning a running VM allowed only when VM is running on its preferred host. Second, when host is removed, a pinned VM might lose its single preferred host, therefore be pinned to its next startup location. Third, in order to identify if a VM is pinned or where it is pinned, it is required to open the VM for edit. And fourth, pinning requires great care and responsibility from administrator because pinning disrupt load balancing and optimization. And for conclusion, Here are some reference links to related OVIRT features, such as scheduling, migration, and affinity groups. This is the end. Thank you for your time and attention.